Okay, so I would ask please our next speaker, Mikara, to make her way to the stage. Oh, that's speaking of sound.
Can you see and hear me fine?
Yes. Hi, Mikara. How are you?
I'm hoping that this screen share doesn't not work, but let's see.
It's like, yeah, maybe test that. We got a few minutes. Yeah,
Cool.
I can see it.
Can you see full screen?
Yep. Cool.
Yes.
So let me introduce you a little to everyone. Wow, there's so much to say about Mikara, but I'll just stick to the basics. Mikara is an architect by training. A very fascinating background, which she's, I think, going to go into with her talk, which is architect and a service designer walk into a bar. Why you should always talk to strangers. I love that title of that talk. A little bit more about Mikara, just so you get an idea about her if you don't know her. She also is a fan of Malcolm Gladwell, like Shazal, and she's read The 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma. As well as her other literary interests are George Orwell and Vladimir Nabokov. The most impactful classes she took at school was art and history, so that explains also her reading choices. A bit more about her. Well, I don't want to talk too much. I'll rather use this time to hear Mikara. So, Mikara, over to you.
Cool. I can't see any of your faces, so I'm just hoping that you can see me fine. I'm looking at my screen, but that's fine. Cool. So from my end, my name is Mikara, like I mentioned. I'm an architect by training, and I kind of moved into service design during the height of the pandemic over a long period, which I'll explain shortly. And this talk sort of really details. I'm really interested in big picture stuff, like the sort of what foundationally makes a good designer, and how can we, from a kind of humanity level, grapple with design concepts. So trust for me has come up as a big thing, and it is something that's been spoken about quite a bit. But I thought I could detail my journey from one design field into the next, and how trust has really played such a foundational role for me. So that's really what this is about. So, like Sanisha mentioned, Malcolm Gladwell, I'm quite a fan. I was reading Talking to Strangers recently by him, and he makes this very brazen statement in the book that humans haven't evolved to be able to detect lies, to detect deception. They have no idea how to do that. And he does a series of tests in the book where he shows how, whether you're trained in the FBI or you're a detective, when push comes to shove, people really can't tell when somebody's actually lying to their face. And this sort of question about, is it just like a glitch? Like, do we just not evolve past that? And this quote then really comes to mind for me, which is that he says, virtually everything you do in the world requires that you have implicit faith in the honesty of others. So to build anything of value, you need to be able to trust, which is probably why it hasn't been built out of our evolutionary kind of building. And this really stands out for me because I think it's really important in how we think about the world. So this is a little bit of background for me. This is a picture of my dad in yellow, and it's his 60th birthday. And I use it because I've sort of been brought up in a home where like trust is second nature. I didn't think of the skill until it wasn't. This picture is at his 60th birthday, and people around him made up half. Can you hear? Hello?
Yes.
The people around him made up half. I think somebody needs to mute. The people around him made up half the sort of contingent. And these are people that obviously are not his age. They're less than half his age. They happen to be my friends, sister's friends, people that we pulled along the way, strays. And he himself created these much so that they kind of dropped everything that they needed to do and made sure that they were there for these sort of milestone things. And so these are his friends as well as being our friends. And this is not something that has been restricted to friendship groups. It's also gone to, like, he brings people home that he meets on a plane. He brings people home that we meet, you know, he'll like find a garden. It's okay. Hold on. I think somebody needs to move. Sorry.
Yeah, just a reminder, please, if you're sitting in the front 2 rows, just to mute yourself, please.
Yeah, so this just sort of paints a picture about, you know, where trust sort of comes from. So for me, what comes to mind for me is that trust is really a foundation in human growth, firstly, and then that has a role in design, of course. And the second thing is that we live in a world that is inherently distrustful. And I was just lucky enough to have grown up in a place where, you know, I'm able to trust quite easily. So this talk details why trust is important in design, how in practical examples, and then, you know, through anecdotes showing how these things have worked in both my architecture career and getting into service design. So I'll start with my favorite story, and it was probably one that made me realize the value of trust in the design field, like upfront. I used to work at an architecture company called Nsika Architects, really small, like 5 people. And they did a lot of work in government, a lot of government-based work. And it was all community-driven, all trying to get community architecture into environments that needed it. So this was a project that we were commissioned to do a community center in Westbury. And Westbury was a DA-run district. And because we were funded by the government, they thought that we were ANC, you know, run project team. And as a result, you know, trying to put up a community center, we got threats that it was going to be burnt down. Nobody wanted the community center. There was absolute, like, distrust between how they saw what we were trying to do and, you know, their own feelings about the project and what agenda the project could have. So the project went on hold, and we went door to door speaking to the community. So I had, like, literally millions of cups of coffee through this process, getting to hear what the community wanted and what their fears were, which was not really part of our job, but I commend Nadia for kind of making that happen. Even Nadia is my boss, kind of making that happen and ensuring that we get commitment from the community first. And we did this. And this is just a drawing of a series of sections that I was drawing while going door to door to make sure that people could understand, you know, this is how far it is from your building, what impact does the wall have, etc. And we did this with pretty much all of them. So as a result, it took a lot longer than expected. I was not part of the actual development. Was not there for that point because it took way longer than expected. But the building got built. I've heard only great things about it, and I've heard that it's been very well used by the community. So what that tells me is that trust really proves more powerful in any of these scenarios, and you usually get the better outcome for the person who's experiencing or getting the product that we're trying to design for, and it always wins in the long run. It just takes time. The second part to this is about dialogue. So I think we live in a sort of world where we don't really know what dialogue is. We understand how to listen to respond, but we don't really know how to engage in dialogue. And this is a whole, like, discourse, you know, to be able to understand what value dialogue has in the world. It's something that I'm quite passionate about. I think it requires tools, and it's not something that's natural to everyone. And I think there's opportunities for us to learn. So, for example, what came up quite strongly for me was when the pandemic hit, there was this, like, influx of big corporates asking their employees, no, but really, how are you? You know, we haven't asked you how you were for the last 22 years that you've been working here, but really, how are you? Because we need to grapple with how you're feeling. And this complete lack of being able to engage with employees or engage with other people on a meaningful level besides the, I'm fine, how are you? I'm busy, I'm tired. Like, besides that sort of superficiality, nobody really knew how to get deeper into it. And for me, it shone quite a light on the fact that people don't really know how to engage. And there's these certain rules for engagement in specific scenarios that actually doesn't allow you to get the maximum learning, growth, whatever, out of whoever you engage with. So I thought, like, I'm going to talk about dialogue and how I think it's been vital in getting me from kind of place A to B. A lot of people ask me, how did you move from the one to the other? And I made a little diagram to explain it. People think it's linear in many cases. So I got my master's in architecture in 2013, and I was an architect. Then I started lecturing kind of concurrently, which is the kind of peachy color. And I continued to do that. And I'd never heard of the word UX or service design or any of those things. Then in 2017, my partner, whose name is Ash, he joined the community with a lot of help from like meetup groups. She can do all of those little environments that allowed him to learn more about UX. So I heard about UX in this space. That was somewhere in 2017. And I started talking to one or two people just to understand what it was, really in solidarity with him. And then I heard the word service design, which really sparked my interest. And I started asking a ton more questions because that spoke to something that I was really interested in conceptually. And then from there, I went into a bit of a slump where I was like, how would I ever move there? And spoke to lots more people. All the yellow dots indicate lots of people that I spoke to. And then I got introduced to somebody who kind of organically became my mentor. And that was a high moment for me. And then still, with all the training, with all the work that I was doing, nothing. I really just thought, I'm terrible. I really must suck at this. But I still continued to speak to people, learn as much as I could from just engaging with human beings. And then out of nowhere, without doing much, I got a job offer. And I didn't apply for it. I didn't do any of those things, but it was really through these huge engagements where some of them came to something, some of them came to nothing. I was able to get to where I am now, which was where I was aiming to go. And that doesn't sort of stop, like I say the job is one thing, but if you look, there's further things that are going on. Now I have 5 mentors that I speak to about different things at different times. We have these like learning sessions where I'm speaking to 2 people at a time. I think this continued like growth of an environment of dialogue is really important. And the important thing for me is that it also takes time. If you look at the time frame, the scale is what is important. People are quite impatient. So the lesson from this that I get is that dialogue goes alongside with patience, and they don't kind of reap things immediately. They take a lot longer, but if you master both, they usually work in your favor. And then the last kind of portion of that is I don't think we live in a bubble. We live in a community, or we don't live in a vacuum. And I think the concept of 2 people, engaging in dialogue is one thing, but scaling that to generate and understand what a community means is really, really, really important. And it provides like huge value. So I learned about community and the value of community from maybe personally growing up in Durban, like just having grown up in that environment where there was a safety and a safety net that came from community. But having then practiced in architecture and trying to instill or create communities through the way that we designed, brought a whole new lens to what community meant. Now, during teaching at the moment, we're talking about what it means to commune. I teach at UJ, and at the moment we're speaking about this concept of what it means to commune and what is the sort of difference between community and communing. So a commune is sort of a group of people that share responsibilities and share growth, essentially, to be able to allow everybody to bloom in a certain way. And it's something that I think is really valuable in the world we live in, where there's a huge amount of like decentralization. Right? So when I talk about decentralization, I'm talking about if we look at what happened with what's it called? But I'm saying Bitcoin, sorry, with remote working due to COVID, the decentralization away from buildings, for instance, creates a whole new opportunity for ways to commune. The decentralization with things like Bitcoin or blockchain allows you to decentralize from existing infrastructure that creates new opportunities to commune and make better societies, design better ways of thinking. And I'm really interested in this because you can't do anything as an island, but how do you create meaningful micro communities in order for change to happen in a meaningful way? So an example of this, which I absolutely love, is This is a example in Jordan where they used blockchain technology to design for dignity, to design for humanity. They the World Food Program has obviously a food program where they provide food to the refugees, the Syrian refugees who live in Jordan, and it's like 110,000 people or something like this, and they have these big supermarkets. So how it used to work is that people would just be given food handouts, and what they found over time was it created a lack of dignity, lack of choice. People were not able to pick what they wanted to eat, and it just created like sort of a bad vibe that in an already bad environment. So it helped to implement something that was going to be able to create dignity. So what they did was they implemented blockchain technology, where they didn't need to have a financial institution for people to be able to have money and a stipend and pay. And also gave the opportunity for people to have a certain identity. Most people come from Syria without any identity or official identity, and with blockchain they were able to mitigate that, to allow people's eyes to scan and allow them to be able to make food that they wanted. It's such a simple change, but the sort of decentralization of power and ability to see how it can work can make such massive change to like hundreds of thousands of people at once. So an example, again, from the architecture world, this was a project I worked on for the research and development arm of the architecture company I was at, Workman and Partners, where we were kind of commissioned to work on understanding, so it wasn't building a building, it was understanding why precincts like the F&B precinct in town work, and why they do so well, and how do they contribute to their community. And so obviously there's pros and cons to this kind of environment, where it's a kind of central kind of autonomous power in the space that dictates how people are allowed to move in and out of space. But there are pros to it in that people feel safe. So we did like 70 interviews. This is a picture of one of my colleagues. We were in people's shops. She's sitting on one of those things where the blankets became the table. And we went through and we did millions and millions of interviews, or had series of dialogues with people. And what we discovered was that the one thing that the bank couldn't buy in the area was the mosque. And so they bought everything around the mosque, but they couldn't buy the mosque because the mosque was a heritage site. And as a result, they couldn't stop people from coming through the space. And that brought together soup kitchens. It brought together initiatives from F&B to support the people who were poorer in the community. F&B, in fact, started the soup kitchen as opposed to thinking it was the mosque itself. And so it created these like kind of neat, cute moments where people were doing things and engaging in things that they were not necessarily, that they wouldn't ordinarily have done had F&B bought the whole precinct. So this idea of being able to decentralize the power, decentralize how people were engaging with this, or allowed to engage with the space, or what kind of engagement was allowed in the space, allowed for a lot more richness. So this is just like probably one of my favorite pictures, which is showing the kind of diversity in that space. You've got the guy going to pray, there's a gentleman sitting just resting, there's people from the bank who are smoking, and then there's a few homeless people in the picture as well, all symbiotic. So what this brings me to is like, I think the concept of community and what that can look like if you organically allow it to work for you. You'll never know what the outcomes are unless you participate and unless you get into a community, And all of these examples allow you to see that there's so much richness in community if you just engage. For me, getting into this, I call it the X community, the whole user experience space community, it has been so amazing. People are humble. There's such a reset in how we think about the world. And for me, I think you have to be able to belong to these things in order to kind of get the most out of it and give the most back. So I think it's this kind of symbiosis that I was speaking about, that community enables you to grow, but you have to be able to give and take. And that applies to corporate, that applies to individuals, that applies to people wanting to get into the industry, and it applies to people who are already in the industry that want to give back. So kind of coming full circle, I don't know if I can press play from here. Can I? So kind of coming full circle, we have when I I'll play it in a second. When I moved out of home, I struggled quite a bit with, feeling like I wasn't getting the level of dialogue or engagement that I grew up quite used to. So every Monday we would have dinner at my parents' place, and it's, the richness kind of came back, the dialogue and the kind of scope that we were able to speak about. And so we started opening up these sessions to people from all over, people we meet on the street or whatever. And they were just, people are welcome to come over and have dinner. And I started documenting it just because I thought it was really rich content to keep for myself for like when this is no longer possible one day. And as a result, like, I really think that I'm a better designer and maybe a better person because of this sort of engagement. I tried to document each of them. I tried to explain what we were talking about, and so the value came out of each of them. And I started to kind of color code them, and it's gotten quite a bit of traction. Lots of people have sort of asked to want to be part of the conversations and engage in the conversation. So if there's anything you take away from here, I think to be able to be a good designer, in my opinion, is like being able to engage with as much as possible and with as many people as possible. And that means speaking, even though it's uncomfortable at times. So yeah, just speaking and engaging with as many people as possible can really make design better, as far as I'm concerned. But it takes a certain level of trust, and we've definitely been burnt from time to time. But when I ask my folks, who've opened up their home for now 30, 40 years, they say, yeah, we've been burnt, but we get so much more out of being trusting than we lose. So there's always that. Cool, that's me.
Thank you, Mikara. I want to get a view on if there's anyone at the podium for questions or in the chat. My own thoughts on this so far. It really resonated with me. All the things you mentioned: trust, dialogue, patience, community, decentralizing, creating meaningful micro communities. It feels like that is the only way we can really create meaningful change, is if we have all these principles in mind. And I think trust is, for me, wow, it's a huge one. And so far we've only really maybe felt that in our small communities, and now we're being forced to extend that to our neighbors and to people who, like, even in terms of country neighbors when it comes to this COVID pandemic. So yeah, those are my thoughts so far, but I would love to hear other people and any questions. Stefan, thank you for stepping up. Go for it.
Hi, Mikara. Thanks for that very interesting talk. So I have a question for you. So we're talking about how community, in a sense, actually also help to evolve and like architecture projects in general. So how do you think trust and community can have an impact on UX projects in general? Because I know architecture is a bit more fluent in terms of project itself, and we're designing specifically sometimes for specific users, so it's a bit more restricted.
I think I've lost Stefan.
Yeah, Stefan, maybe, sorry, I think you got cut off there. Can you repeat the question? Seems we've lost Stefan.
I think he's left us.
Oh no, he's back. Stefan, sorry, please repeat your question. Okay, while Stefan comes back, Alex, you are stepping up to the podium. Great to see you, Alex.
Hey, Alex.
Hi, sorry, I had a mic trouble there. Hi, great talk, Mikara.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to ask about how you how you manage, or how you'd recommend, I don't know if you're introverted or extroverted, but, there's a lot of, as an introvert, if you go around talking to people to build trust, that's a lot of energy drain. How do you see that being managed, especially in like a working context?
That's such a brilliant question, because what I found was during the pandemic, I had not realized how much energy I was expending before that on people and engagement, just because it was something that I think my folks do it effortlessly. Like they don't need to rest, but I found that I was struggling quite a bit. And when I got into the pandemic, I felt like, I was kind of welcoming the fact that I was like alone and in complete isolation. So from that learning, what I realized was I need to make compartmentalized time when I'm like actively engaging. So for me, it's really about like, how do I manage my time to make sure that I'm still getting time that I can recuperate enough to be able to give back, because you can't give anything unless you're like, fully fueled yourself. So what I've done is sort of just make sure that I have like set aside time once a day. I have to do an hour-long walk, for instance, alone. So it's that kind of ritual that I find is very recharging, that allows me to be a bit more engaged personally. But I think it's different for everyone.
What do you do when it rains?
What I do when it rains? I don't speak to people then. I stopped speaking to people at that point. I think it's really about managing. For me, it's been about managing or being conscious of my energy levels. So it's not about managing it every day. I don't think every day is the same, but being very conscious of when I'm feeling sapped, and when I'm feeling sapped, allowing myself the kind of privilege to feel that way. And then when I feel good again, being able to go back into doing it. But I think it is really about consistency. So even if you're not doing it every day, the consistency of being able to engage at least a few times a week in a regular way does the same thing. So you've just got to manage it according to your own sort of ebb and flow, I think. Stefan, I think you're back. Yeah.
Stefan, maybe try refresh your browser. That may work, because we can't see you or hear you. Limochang says in the chat, brilliant talk, Mikara. Oh, there you are, Stefan. Sorry. Go for it.
Hello.
Hi. Sorry, we lost you.
Oh, no, this has been happening a few times now. I'm not sure. Did you hear my question, Mikara, at all before?
Didn't entirely. Sorry.
No, it's cool. I will quickly just ask it again. So, based on your presentation, well done, though. It was quite interesting to see how the idea of community also has a very impact on UX as well. But I was just wondering, how do you think we can gain more trust in the UX field, like you guys are trying to do for that specific project that you guys are working on? I'd just like to hear from your perspective, because you were working, architecture is a bit more fluent, where UX is sometimes a bit more restricted in terms of the amount of people that we are involved with sometimes in projects. So I'd just like to get your feedback on that.
So I speak a lot more about architecture generally, just because I think I'm so new and kind of engaging in this new space. I often feel like I maybe don't want to say the wrong thing, but my opinion on that, like if I think about my short experience in the financial sector, where I've felt like I've gotten most traction or kind of movement has been through creating trustful relationships with the people I work with. And that's not just the designers. That's been across all the different, whether it's product owner or tech guys. So just being able to really show them what we're trying to do in a very open, transparent, like not trying to mystify the whole process. I think often these silos work, and that's very similar in architecture. Architects do these things and people think, oh, they just draw pretty pictures. And there's just a lack of communication about what everybody's trying to do holistically. So to answer your question, and I hope I'm doing it properly, I would say it's just about making sure that the communication is so open with everybody that I have engaged with, that people sort of support what you're trying to do for the user, it makes it a lot easier for them to then engage with you from a design perspective, is what my short experience has showed me.
No, definitely. One more quick question. So how do you think architecture has influenced your design strategy for UX, actually, and service design in general?
Sure, that's a good question. So I'd say it's a lot more about thinking at scale for me, like understanding big scale and small scale. So architecture really teaches you about scale, the scale of a city, the scale of a bedroom, the scale of, an actual chair. And kind of bridging all those scales is the same with how we would do it in designing interfaces for people. And so that's probably the biggest lesson that I've taken from there, understanding what people need at different scales.
That's true. Empathy on another level, I suppose. But awesome. Thanks, Mikara.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you can intersect all these different things as an architect and apply it to design. I think that, or to mobile design. I think that's amazing. Any other questions? We have just a couple more minutes with Mikara before we break for lunch, and Liz would like to, I think, make also a few announcements. So Liz, maybe you want to head up also to the any more questions? Thank you for the comment. Lemochang, she says, brilliant talk, Mikara. My biggest takeaway is that empathy is a bridge towards building trust, and that pretty much speaks to the core principles of design thinking. Thank you. Agree 100% with that. Okay, I'm going to step away and hand over to Liz.
Cool.